The next element is reflect. Reflect on what you've done in the past. Because like I mentioned earlier, you probably have exercised your PM muscle before. You just haven't really thought critically on how you did so. So once you learn kind of the first two things, you can reflect, look back, identify what you enjoyed so that you know what types of problems you want to address in the PM scope of things.
Hello, audience. Welcome to What Does It Take podcast. Today, we have Alberto in our podcast as a guest. He worked at Microsoft as a PM for 1 year, and we wanted to bring him to get more insights from what he's done and what kind of backgrounds he had. And let's just hear more from him. Welcome, Alberto.
Thank you, Ray. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Let's just start off with what is a program manager? A lot of audience is quite curious about what's a PM in general. There isn't a clear definition out there, and everybody has different definition from person to person. So in your view, what is a program manager?
Oh, that's a great question. And yeah, if you look up definitions of program managers, you'll get variation across the board. But the way that I like to frame program manager is that you are the bridge between the product and the end user. So what does that mean? So take any product, any solution that you want to provide, and say if you think of a software engineer, you kind of have the idea that, they build the infrastructure, they do the code, to get the product working. Eventually that product ships out and it's in the hands of an end user, if it's an app or something like that. But there's something that needs to take that solution to the customer. And that's where the program manager really thrives in providing that bridge. There's someone that needs to collect user feedback along the way. There is someone who needs to prioritize the features that should be built if it's an application. There is someone who needs to help figure out the roadmap. What's the timeline? What's our North Star? What is the solution? What are the objectives of this kind of product? And is there anything that we can learn more from our customers? And that sort of information that helps really connect the solution to the customer. And so that's really what I think about the program manager is, ensuring that process goes as effectively as possible and have someone kind of providing the oversight of the end-to-end of that experience.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When people think of building a software, people just think about the programming side of things. But there's a lot of aspects that get into building that software, such as marketing, prioritization, which features to build first. Because there's so many things you can build, but software engineers' time should be spent on actually building more so than prioritizing and thinking about the marketing side, product market fit, and so on. So I think that's a very good summary of it.
Yeah.
And when you were at Microsoft, what was your role like, and what kind of work did you do as a PM?
So my journey as a PM at Microsoft was quite rewarding for a lot of different reasons. Actually, if you look at my journey of becoming a PM at Microsoft, I started off sort of exploring both software engineering and product management or program management at Microsoft. Namely, in my first internship, I did both through their Explore internship program. And so in that component of being a program manager, that was my first exposure to specs, which is when you sort of write what features are going to go into the solution. How to practice getting user feedback. So one thing that we would do is for the app that we were working on, we would print out the experiences. Maybe there's an experience A and an experience B, and then we would tape it on the wall and have people provide feedback on which solution they like better.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first exposure to understanding the idea of not only kind of designing the solution, but getting user feedback and thinking and empathizing with the customer and how they're going to experience the product. That eventually took me into my second internship because that intrigued me. I told myself I really want to spend more time kind of exploring this idea of becoming a program manager. And there I did more investigations and did analytic reports based on data that I kind of looked at to help inform strategies and roadmaps. Again, kind of the strategic thinking that comes to being a program manager. And that eventually took me to my full-time position, during the year that, I was working in Microsoft.
Okay. So you mentioned you had an internship, right? Let's dive back to your background, start from your first year back in college and dive into internship, which led to your PM position at Microsoft. So what was your major in university? And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I graduated from Stanford University in 2018 with a bachelor's in symbolic systems. So I actually did not start off in the symbolic systems program. I started in bioengineering for the first year, and then I decided that I wanted to do something else. And I pivoted to that major towards the end of my freshman year, and that's what I ended up graduating in.
And what is a symbolic system?
That is always the follow-up question. So symbolic systems is a major that I love because it's so interdisciplinary. It gives you breadth across different subject areas. So the infrastructure of the major is that your core classes come from computer science. They come psychology, from philosophy and linguistics. And depending on your concentration, you can even add in things like from the School of Education or diving deeper into one of the first 4 disciplines that I mentioned. So it's sort of meant to be a major that really brings you introduction to both computer science and what's happening in those technologies, with also more of the humanities, like what's going on in the other areas there. And it allows you to kind of bring those 2 perspectives in one location and understand where there's overlap.
That's interesting. Do you think having those multidisciplinary background helped you get a job at Microsoft as a PM?
Yes. Definitely in hindsight, I can see where there's mapping from each of the subject areas that I studied to how it's enabled me to learn and grow as a PM, something that I'm still doing as an early in career individual. But for example, when you think of, psychology, there's a lot of branches of psychology, but kind of generally speaking, psychology is about human interaction. It's, who we are as humans, how do we interact with the world, how do we think, what motivates us, questions like that. And those are topics and areas that, are really helpful when you're working on teams. It allows you to collaborate, allows you to come and understand mindsets, see how you can build a growth mindset in the group, how you can better collaborate, what motivates different teams across the company. And so psychology allows a lot for the human interaction with your coworkers, but also, as I mentioned earlier, you need to do user testing. You need to empathize with your users. And so psychology helps provide a lens and a viewpoint that really helps you kind of unravel the beauty of that side of, being a program manager. Whereas you look at something like philosophy, those are some of the most rigorous papers I had to write. It's to the point. It isn't a page you get page limits and how much you can write, and so it's not like you have to write a minimum of 5 pages. It'll be more you have at maximum 5 pages. So you have to really be critical in how you're thinking,
condensing your thoughts, right?
Yeah, you have to write concisely, clearly, to the point, lay out the argument, and that's what program management is. It's taking a problem, extracting the most important elements of it and documenting that, or building some sort of solution or plan around that to kind of implement the features. So all the humanities play a role in kind of that strategic thinking, the human interaction and those components. And then computer science is more of the technical, enablement, understanding the technology, understanding the solution and things like that. So
yeah, no, I 100% agree to that. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important empathy is. Even Microsoft CEO Satya, emphasizes that a lot. Empathy should be embedded in everything that we build, because at the end of the day, we're building a product, software, hardware, whatever it is. We're building a product that people use, right? So if you can't emphasize the different types of people, different ethnicity, race, age, whatever it is, if you can emphasize with those people in a perspective from the lens of those people, we're not building the right product, right? So I think that's why you well said the humane part of things that's important on top of the computer science and programming background. Of course, we need those programming background in order to be able to work with engineers and to understand from the computer perspective, but also the human perspective is as important, and that's very much neglected in a lot of senses. So I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, and I mean, when you touch upon the theme of like sympathizing and empathizing with the end users, one of the elements that's really important is kind of diversity. And when you think of diversity, there's a lot of elements, but what I want to emphasize is something that's just as critical as diversity of thought. diversity of kind of subject areas that you've studied, right? Not just being so disciplined and focused on one area. And so that's one of the beauties of as a program manager is that you can come in with all these kind of diverse ways of thinking and diverse subject areas where you can apply the skills and ways of thinking that you have learned into a problem that falls within the program management space.
Right.
So, and it allows you to be well-rounded and build better products.
Yeah. So that's interesting because one of the point that my previous guest, Alan, he brought up was that, so I asked him what's one of the advice that you would give to aspiring PMs. And he said,
empathy is what's going to stand out for what is going to be a okay PM and a really great PM. Just because of all the different people that you're going to interact with, you're going to be working with engineers, you're going to be working with customers, you're going to work with legal, other PMs, UX designers, marketing, content writers, all these types of people that have all very diverse work styles and approaches to life. And really the only way to be able to, deliver a product and be able to make all these other people successful comes from empathy.
that's what's going to grow you and be able to think from other people's perspective, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So let's take it back to your university days. So you started out with bioengineering. You didn't like it. I don't know if you liked it or not, but you switched to symbolic system.
Yes.
You said you switched in second year. Is that right?
End of my freshman year, second year is really when I started to kind of pick up the courses and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. And most of the PMs I talked to on my show is that they did not know about PM for a long time, maybe close to graduation, which was my case. I didn't know until like very close to my graduation. But when did you know about PM?
I kid you not. This is sort of how I found out. So one, working in the tech industry is not anything I ever really imagined kind of early on. And I'm talking middle school, high school years. Being in the Silicon Valley, though, once I started undergraduate, technology is a really big thing.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how I became kind of introduced to technology. After my freshman year, I had taken a computer science course, and I was looking and thinking through what sorts of internships I wanted to do after my sophomore year, right? So I had finished my freshman year. I was in the end of my summer, getting ready to go into my sophomore year, and I was thinking what sort of experiences I want.
So you knew you wanted to do an internship after your second year?
Yes.
Okay.
And out of curiosity, I was like, let me explore what's out there at Microsoft. And so I reached out to someone who was working there, and they kind of told me a little bit about Microsoft and the internship programs that they had there. That individual helped connect me to the Explorer internship at Microsoft. I sent my resume in. They reviewed it. I did a phone screen interview. And so I knew I was interviewing with Microsoft because I was curious about, let's see, what path this takes me down. Mm-hmm. They then schedule an in-person interview. As I was learning about the Explorer internship program, it is intended for first year and second year undergraduate students.
And do you have to have a certain major for that, or it doesn't matter?
I mean, if you have a computer science degree or something like that, it definitely helps.
Okay.
There is some open-mindedness to sort of if you have other majors, but you have the right technical skills or you've done the right side projects. So at least I personally don't say, there's an A to A mapping in terms of this major to do this internship.
Right.
It's more about the skill set and if you have the mindset and the interest and the intrigue.
And how did you reach out to this person? Did you know this person beforehand, or did you just reach out cold? Or
no, I knew this person from a student organization on campus.
Okay.
And so she had completed a internship at Microsoft that same summer, and so she reached out to a couple members from that organization, and that's how I became kind of connected. And so what ended up happening, I kid you not. So I learned about the Explorer internship program. They say, hey, you'll do both software engineering and program management. They explain program management very broadly as kind of a different experience to software engineering. I asked her, hey, what is program management? I started asking other people, but it was...
Oh, so that's when you first found out about program management?
That's when I first found out, is sort of like through this program that offers, an opportunity for you to like test the waters in that area. And so one thing that I remember is the day before my interview, I had already acquired a knowledge somewhat on how to prepare for the technical interview for the software engineering.
Mm-hmm. Those coding questions, right?
Yes, the coding questions.
Yep.
But not for program management. So I actually picked up the crack in the PM interview the day before that I interviewed, and that was really the first time that I sat down and deeply thought through what a PM is.
Okay.
And that's where I read through the book and I learned about the different types of interview questions. I learned about the significance and importance of, a program manager. And that's where my intrigue started to peak. And honestly, out of the 3 interviews that I had for that Explore internship, the PM one was my favorite. I still remember it to this day. The question is, design a parking lot. They leave it ambiguous on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So FYI, if you're ever interviewing, they'll ask you ambiguous design questions and you have to kind of probe with follow-up questions. And so
Right.
did the interview, did the Explore internship, and then that kind of continued me down the program manager.
So you must have really enjoyed that PM experience.
Yeah. I had fun designing a parking lot, even though I'm not an architect or anything, but just kind of thinking through the problem and solving of that.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. You got to be excited to solve that problem by, Alberto touched on it a little bit, but you got to ask questions right away when you are given those questions, because it's ambiguous and it's meant to be ambiguous so that you can define it in a way that you want to design or the interviewer wants to design, right? So yeah, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
And after your internship, did you know you're coming back as a full-time, or did you want to explore more before coming back to Microsoft PM as a full-time?
So after my first internship, I knew that I wanted to kind of spend more time in the program manager space.
Okay.
So my first summer was split between software engineer and program manager. And of the two, I really was intrigued by program manager. So I decided that Microsoft was a great place to kind of do another 12 weeks
Okay.
focused on that discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, I enjoyed those 12 weeks, but I was still curious and really driven to learn more about that discipline. In addition to really liking the team and the organization that I was in and just the overall experience of the company, but focusing on the PM lens of things, I enjoyed those 12 weeks. I enjoyed the problem solving that happened. At that point is where I started to make the connection between being a program manager and my major. So it facilitated me going into my senior year with a certain mindset and seeing, hey, on this project, I'm using PM type skills in school. And so that really drove my interest in kind of coming back full time as a program manager to get an even longer taste of what that takes.
I see. So you didn't do any other internship afterwards?
No. So I did my 2 internships at Microsoft, and then I went straight into full-timer, into a program manager role.
I see.
Mhm.
All right. So I want to touch a little bit on the background that you just talked about. So key takeaway here is you expose yourself by talking to somebody you knew from the organization that you were in before. And that led to you learning more about software engineering and program management that you never knew about, right? And that was a great opportunity working at Microsoft, and you loved it so much so that you took another internship as a program manager to learn more about it and get the full taste of program management, and then eventually to full-time working at Microsoft as a PM.
Yes.
So if you take it back, I think what's important here is that you put yourself, which no one forced you to a organization that you were either interested in or you really liked. Whatever the reason was, you were in there and building connections, building friends, which led you to this job eventually.
Yes.
So one of the advice that I would think that you would give is, put yourself out there, be in an organization, be in a club. But what I would assume that a lot of people out there are already doing these extracurricular activities.
Yes.
So what would be your advice to people who are already in the club, but to get more out of it? Not to an extent that you're trying to get a job from it, but to an extent that will lead you to a better person eventually.
Yes. Well, kind of from that question, one of the lenses that comes to mind is sort of as you're involved in all these like student clubs or extracurriculars or activities that you do, on the side projects, things like that. One of the things that is really nice to see in hindsight is appreciating moments and times when you use like program management skill sets in everything that you've done.
Yeah.
The reason why I point that out is up to this point, we've been talking about program management, and we've kind of created the association with Microsoft. In other words, kind of being in the tech industry.
Yep.
But when I think of program management or product management, being a PM, it really generalizes to other areas. And so to your point, if you're involved in a student club, let's take an example. If you're the treasurer of your student club and you're dealing with the finances, and there's different initiatives that the group wants to put together, you're sort of doing PM skills by looking at what the budget is, prioritizing based on what the different initiatives the group wants to run, kind of having those discussions and allotting budgets to different areas and figuring out and keeping track, documenting it, seeing how it's going to influence the budget moving forward, what the budget has been in the past. That strategic thinking, organizational skills, prioritizing, those are PM skills.
Yeah.
Right? And so maybe for people that are listening to this, they've never thought about program management as a role. Nevertheless, program management within the tech industry. But they've probably have exercised some of these skill sets that when you take a moment to reflect back and see all the experiences you've had, you can sort of map experiences to skill sets such that if you want to go into program management in the tech industry or not, you probably have already started building that skill set. And then it's just a matter of learning the discipline, to becoming a subject matter expert in whatever area you want to apply it in and kind of grow from there.
So I guess it's important to do a reflection.
Yes.
To a point that what am I actually gaining from what I'm doing in a daily basis? Because I can squeeze in one more in what you just mentioned is, if you're trying to get a budget, talk to the student council or the school to get a more budget on your student club. That's also same thing as what PMs do. For example, you're trying to get a budget for the feature or the product that you're building to be out there, right? You need a budget to hire people, hire developers, and so on. So, a lot of the things that you actually do in daily life, it's very similar to PM work. And what I do currently at Microsoft as well is very applicable to anything I do in life, not just in a tech aspect, but just working with people, being around with people, influencing people, learning from different people, and making sure everybody's involved as a team. Like a lot of this, these come together just like a PM.
Yeah. And I like your point, like kind of in what you just said, you identified certain areas that you enjoy, like working with people, bringing them together, you can apply that to PM as like, working with the users, doing user studies, right? And so to your point, if you ask yourself, hey, what problems have I really enjoyed solving? And what aspects that I really enjoy solving? And then exercise the muscle of asking, what skill was I really applying? From a technical perspective, from a behavioral perspective, as many lenses as you can, you'll find yourself painting a picture that allows you to broaden your horizon and what you can do in a career.
I see. And I'm going to switch gear and ask you about side projects.
Yes.
How do you feel about the side project and how important that is to become a PM?
Oh, it's really important for several reasons. One of which is time management. As a program manager, you consistently have to allocate your time accordingly. And so, for example, as a PM, one of the things that's very critical is knowing what your priorities are. Like where are your top 3 areas of focus, and making sure that any project you take on focuses on that. You sort of do that subconsciously with side projects. So, for example, I like doing side projects that are community building, bringing people together who care about a certain topic and building that together. So that's my priority for the side project, and so having my priorities and then using that to drive my vision or drive my collaboration or my participation in a side project is very critical to make sure that I'm using my time effectively, but also that I'm doing it, wholeheartedly, and that I'm enjoying the experience. And so in a side project is to be in a PM. And so you learn a lot of the skills and kind of help exercise that element of it too.
I see. If you can go back in time, what would you tell your old self as an advice?
Oh, I have a lot.
You can talk about it from two different angles, as in, what's one thing that you've done well, and what's one thing that you didn't do well that you should have probably changed.
Yeah. I'll start with the second, which is something that I could do better. That's something that I'm still doing better, which is kind of fail fast, learn faster. The reason why it's so critical in a PM, and it's something that you learn with experience, it's something that I'm very much still learning from experience. There are times where you have to be really thoughtful, and there are times where you just have to put a minimal viable product, which is one of the key buzzwords you hear a lot in the PM world, in that just test. If you're building a solution, put some core little details in and then see what people and customers have to say. And that's something I struggle with greatly because I try to think through things very thoughtfully and thoroughly, elements of kind of trying to find the perfect solution. And sometimes that slows you down.
You're a perfectionist.
Yes, I am a perfectionist. You try to build such a perfect solution and the world moves so fast that solution might no longer be viable from when you started working on that problem. So just failing faster, not getting so caught up on having all the right elements in place and being really open to sort of adapting and iterating on the go is something that I can definitely learn to do faster. And finding the right projects where you need that mindset. That isn't always the right mindset for everything you do, but as you kind of pattern match, you'll learn where to apply that. In terms of things that I've done well, I am very thorough. I am very thorough in trying to kind of understand the different perspectives. I try to view, for example, if I'm working on a project, what would an engineering team really care about with regards to this project? They're probably thinking of resourcing, time, how much, of a priority this is for their developers and engineers. How much of a priority is this for marketing? How is this going to help the story they're trying to drive, and what is their sort of viewpoint with the end customers? And then sales, how does this product provide them an ability to kind of excite people and provide innovative experiences and things like that? And so I like doing that bigger picture thinking because even though it's one product, it's touching different people internally within the company. Nevertheless, it's going to touch multiple people once it goes out into the company, into the real world. And you have to kind of scale that thinking to an even greater magnitude. So I think I've started to exercise that muscle, and I'm continuing to learn how to think about who is this influencing, what do they care about, because all the different components matter and they add up.
And I think that starts with asking a lot of questions, right?
Yes. Ask yourself questions, ask people questions. Be very direct. If you're working on a product and marketing is going to talk about the product, hey, how are you talking about your other products? And kind of get to know how they're having other conversations, and you can help craft a story with them, not for them. And I think that's an element of a PM is you're doing things with people, not necessarily for people. And the distinction I want to drive there is if you do it for people, you're limiting yourself on your perspective. You're kind of thinking, I think this is the right solution and you should talk about it this way and this is how it should look. When you work with people, you craft stories together. You are incorporating user feedback. You're understanding the marketplace. And it allows you to kind of, to something we touched upon earlier, you're empathizing with people. You're with them. You're not giving them something, here, take this product. You're helping solve together across all the lenses. So that's another important element.
Yeah, I think that definitely aligns with the MVP and being lean about your product, right?
Yeah.
Because you just let one small feature out and then see how people react, and you build with that feedback you're getting.
Yes.
So essentially you're building the product with the customers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to end our podcast with thought-provoking questions such as, what does it take to be a PM? And I know we touched a lot on things, but you can talk about it in any way you want.
My first instinct is that there's two elements, right? One is being a problem solver. When I think what does it take to be a PM is learning what are the core skills that a PM needs. We talked about some of them, time management, prioritization, communication skills, and other interpersonal skills, right? That's where the humanities components comes into play. And then there's obviously technical knowledge that is associated with it. So yes, when you want to become a PM, you should learn the technical skills that are required to build products in that org or that company, that you want to work for. But really, what it takes to be PM is you like solving problems, you like asking questions, you like working with different groups of people because you need to have the ability to understand different perspectives to build the best type of product. And ultimately, you have a nice blend of alluding to what I mentioned earlier about being the bridge. When you ask, how would you define a PM? To be the bridge, you have to understand both sides. You need to understand the technologies, the business, things like that. But you also need to understand the people and who you're working, who you're working with and who you're building for and building with, really, kind of to what I alluded earlier. So what it takes, just do research. Do research on the industry you want to get into. Do some broader research on the critical skill sets that people think are important for PM.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next element is reflect. Reflect on what you've done in the past. Because like I mentioned earlier, you probably have exercised your PM muscle before. You just haven't really thought critically on how you did so. So once you learn kind of the first two things, you can reflect, look back, identify what you enjoyed, so that you know what types of problems you want to address in the PM scope of things.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think by doing a reflection, you understand more of your strength, right? Your strength is probably different from me and
yes,
everybody out there. So, when you reflect, you think about what went well and what you could have done better. And that leads you to growth opportunity. And if you're an aspiring PM, that's going to help you understand where your strength lies. And eventually that's going to lead you to put it on your resume,
yes,
which is going to lead you to talk about it in an interview, which will help you shine when you talk about the strength. So.
Yes. It's to your point, what does it take to be a PM? You need to understand, think, and talk like a PM. And yes, certain majors might kind of expose you to that early on, but really for almost any major, you can find instances where you've done that. And if you identify that and you talk about it that way and you learn to exercise those skills, you can land a PM role in the tech industry or some other industry.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So how can the audience find you?
So they can find me all over the place. So I'm a big foodie, so you might run into me into a restaurant. But, more formally, you can find me on LinkedIn at Alberto Covarrubias. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat if you want to learn more about PM, talk more about the experience, understand a little bit more about Microsoft as a company or anything really. That's probably the best way to find me.
Yeah. I'll put his LinkedIn link down below in the description as well.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thanks for joining me, Alberto, and thanks for sharing your insights.
Yeah, and quick note, in running this podcast, you're using PM skills. So for all the people out there who are doing podcasting, realize that you're being a PM. So thank you, Ray.
And you're taking the first step to learn about PM, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, this is meta. You're being a PM as you talk about PM. I love this.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah.